Finally, we are alive. It's alive! Hi, this is Jonathan with NycosRPG, and tonight this is going to be a beginning of a new series. I'm going to still be running it every night, so this will probably be once a week going forward. But we are definitely going to have tonight the beginning of the Session Zero Chronicles. Those of you that are role players who are familiar with the term know that a session zero is the preamble or the beginning of a sequence of roleplay games so that you can collectively communicate what is going on in the game, have an understanding of where the players are coming from, and what you are endeavoring to do as a game master in guiding the story. So, session zero for Nikos is an introduction to what the world is, and I intentionally put the list of information to cover here quite long because I anticipate I might be here for a while tonight. I have made several videos that have been short form, and so as in other episodes, I'm going to be broking down. I'm going to be breaking down each of these sections separate from each other with a slight break between them so that we can have a discussion in between before I go on to the next one to cover all of the details. So let me first start by explaining that a session zero in an episode of Nikos is a ordeal in itself because you have to have a pretty fair understanding of the world of Nikos because this is a place. It's actually it's literally a written fantasy setting, and so therefore it is not something that is physical, and therefore the description of the items that I provide is itself a fiction, and so therefore do not try to anchor what you hear with the realities of our physics because they won't work. It is a fantasy setting. I have had considerably long conversations with people at different times about the Nikos setting, and we often get into the weeds on the physicality of the world, the practicality of the physics, and such. And I am not, nor have I ever been, a physicist or a scientist, although sometimes I play one in an RPG. But so what that means is that each section is going to be a description of what is the state of Nikos at the beginning of this particular iteration, and does not necessarily reflect the reality as it was in any of the previous iterations. So hold on, this is kind of gonna be probably a bumpy ride. All right. Again, welcome to Nikos. This is episode 1, session 0, and we are today talking about, in particular, Helios, Nimbus, and Nikos. Now, the world of Nikos is the role playing environment that my players operate their characters within. And I do have a physical map of that location that I will be sharing in a later piece of this video, not in this particular session, but we will be talking about the world of Nikos. Nikos itself has two solar bodies. In other words, it has two suns, if you will. One is in the sky predominant and monopolizes most of the time in the sky, and occasionally it shares it with the other. Those two suns are called Helios and Nimbus. One is also known in colloquial terms, they'll refer to it as the bright sun, and the other one they refer to as the dark sun. Now, this is not a defining term. Nimbus is actually the name of the sun, but just wanted to clarify that. These names actually date all the way back to the 1970s when I originally started the original arc, and therefore are in no way affiliated with any other properties that use names that are similar. So the concept of Nimbus, therefore, is that it is a protostar. It is functionally it's about 1,000 times larger than our sun. I'm sorry, than our Jupiter, but has an appearance that looks similar to Jupiter in that it has a striped appearance. In other words, it's an orb with stripes across it, although it tends to be in the deeper purple end of the spectrum visually. So if you looked upon it, it would be shades of purple and fuchsia and mauve and things like that, graduating different shades and tints of purple, and therefore purple down to a white, but in that end of the spectrum. Helios, on the other hand, is a regular solar body roughly twice the size of our sun and at a considerable distance. The orbital distance between them is rather expansive, and because I'm not going to follow all of the physics of it, you could consider the system to be virtually a binary star system, in that Nimbus's gravitational effect on the solar body is very nearly as much of an influence as the solar body. Oh, they are exactly. Anyway, the issue is that inverse distance law, Nimbus has the greatest influence on Nikos itself. Furthermore, it's the proximity of Nimbus to Nikos causes it to be considerably larger in the sky. Our sun is, they say about the diameter of a pencil in terms of physical size in the optic sky, but but in the case of Nimbus, it's about the size of a saucer. So physically round. Obviously, you can see that it's an orb in the sky, and that orb passes over roughly at about 24 hours a day. We don't mince the specifics, and I don't do the math of it because I'm not a physicist. But this object in the sky, therefore, Nimbus, is the primary source of energy for all life on Nikos. This light spectrum that emanates from this solar body not only includes the things that we are familiar with for our world, red and ultraviolet and so on, but it also includes another band of basically constantly emanating particles. And these particles defy all definitions that we would expect of, and they have the effect of changing the world through mystical or magical means, and therefore they are considered to be magicals. Magicles. So these particles or magicals that emanate from Nimbus are the source of all magical effects on the world and do contribute to things like its atmosphere, gravitics, and such, because the world is Nikos itself is actually approximately the same size as our moon. It's much smaller than Terra, our world is. And therefore, because of its smaller size and closer proximity to a lesser powerful solar body, it equates. But whatever is necessary to make life occur is amplified or created by Nimbus itself. There's more to it than that, and we will go into that later. But this is just the realization that in the sky at any given time, you have two possible solar bodies, one of which may actually appear in the night sky, if you will, because Helios is so far away that as Nikos makes its orbit around Nimbus, it is going to pass by the visual appearance of Helios, and therefore you'll see it in the sky at times. We will go into the actual physics of it in another video, but I wanted to close out this section by just making it clear that when you look into the sky, you don't see a blue sky as we would, but instead you see a mauve, almost to a pale purple or violet sky. And the closer you get to evening, the darker that light is, so that even in the night sky, as it goes into darkness, the sky turns purple before it fundamentally fades out to a black. So this primary color scheme therefore contributes to things like the appearance of water and such, and we'll definitely be doing that now that we have an understanding of Helios, Nimbus, and Nikos. I'm going to break from this, and I'm going to kind of change formats for a few seconds. So Alrighty, so again, thank you for joining me. If you're visiting Nikos for the first time, welcome. If you've been to the Nikos RPG or are familiar with the Nikos RPG, this is the game world that we're speaking of in particular. It is not particularly associated with the Nikos RPG. It doesn't have to be and hasn't been for its entire run. It's nothing that's new. It's been the place or the game world of my adventurers going all the way back to the 70s. So now when we talk about planetary physics, which we're going to do in a moment, realize that this is going to be a very rudimentary conversation, and I am not a physicist, and the math is not going to work. I'm sure that I will have plenty of people who will be able to point out my errors, and I engage that and say, please bring it on, because it makes for great conversations. So if you are a viewer and you've got some ideas about world building and such, feel free to join us. I want to thank you for your participation tonight and every night that you're here. So we are going to talk about planetary physics and system dynamics at this point. Planetary physics of the world of Nikos are that gravity as we know it functions, with the possible asterisk that for reasons beyond understanding, sea life, creatures that live in the waters, have the capability of operating in the sky as if it were water. What I mean by that is that sea life, everything from squids to sharks to great whales, all have the ability to navigate within the sky of Nikos. Therefore, the sky is constantly filled with things that aren't normally seen in the sky. You can observe dolphins and schools of fish as they move about between the trees and such. And they can go to varieties of heights as well. So sometimes the creatures are down near the landmass itself. Sometimes they are up in the air and so on. This variance does lead to some interesting advances, such as people have the ability as well to enter the skies in a form of flight, as long as they have machines that can convert something magical into a way of lift. So there are airships that are driven upon the winds using large sails, and their hulls gain lift by either being magically enhanced by inlays or engravings, runes, or the like, or they are imbued with it by nature itself. For example, several different forms of eldrin trees can be used to create flying vessels. Generally, those are driven by some other form of magic, either by crystals or singing or just a variety of different kinds. There are even some that are powered by mental psychic powers and such. So there's a wide variety of different types of vessels that can ply the airways, which means that there's a rather successful teaming business in fishing in the air. So you literally can mount an expedition and take your airship up into the skies and hunt your prey from the skies, whether it be ground based. You can, if you wanted to go fox hunting, you could do it via a flight methodology, or perhaps you're going for bigger game like whales and such could be actually hunted in the skies. And because of this ability and this nature, the volume of creatures that are accessible is geometrically improved over that would be the case here on Earth. Further things about the physics include the issue that the stars have not yet been mapped. In other words, there are no constellations defined as yet, because there hasn't been a long enough study of the stars because they only recently became visible. And when I say recently, there have been about 300 years since the stars became visible on Nikos at the end of the 8th iteration and at the beginning of the ninth. And this change that allowed for the appearance of stars hasn't been far enough in the past that somebody's actually done an extensive study on stars and what their patterns are. So we haven't even determined whether there are any stars that have prominence or specific locations in the skies. So that will come, I'm certain, in this iteration as something that becomes a practical science. Other points of planetary physics would include the calendar. And as we talked about already, the primary star for the system, being Nimbus, allows for the clock time of 24 hours per day. That's, I admittedly, was created as a convenience for we as human beings to be able to play in the environment and kind of comprehend the same kind of things. If it was shorter or longer, it might be confusing. So we're keeping the day be 24 hours. Generally, the orbital path of Nikos is very close to being circular in that it keeps an approximately same distance from Nimbus day over day over day. And therefore, because it's orbiting and it's on the same plane as Helios, for some portion of the hours each day, both Helios and Nimbus will be visible. Although at its apogee, at its furthest distance away, the solar body is so small as not to be recognized as important within the orbiting pattern of Nimbus of Nikos itself. So therefore, it basically fades back into the background in comparison with all the other stars because of its extreme distance. But at other points in the orbit, Nikos gets closer to Helios, and therefore it becomes larger and more prominent. And generally, this happens in the fall portion of the year. And when it does become more visible, it is noted on a specific day of the year called double star rising, and that is the day in which it rises at the same time as Helios. Now, that double star rising is going to be on that specific initial day, will not be visible because as the Helios would appear on the horizon, Nimbus, being a brighter star, is going to occlude the light of all other stars in the sky, therefore taking prominence. But as the orbit continues, when Nimbus slowly moves, when Nikos slowly moves into position around Nimbus where it no longer sees that, it will actually potentially be able to see Helios at the dusk and at the next dawn and so on. And so you'll be able to see for a period of time both, as one will be rising as the other one is setting. And this divided day known as day split. So the day split period will last for about three and a half months until they align back to the point where Helios and Nimbus are both in the sky at the same time, in which case Helios will vanish again. Hope that makes sense. There are times when it breaks my brain to think about all this kind of stuff. Also, there are certain materials, such as magicals, that actually defy traditional physics as well. I mean, not to mention the fact that you've got sea life in the air that don't have to fly; they're actually swimming there. That leads also to things like the magicals imbue the well, they imbue the soil of Nikos to the point where it is saturated, to the point where the saturation becomes untenable, in which case it starts to excrete the magicals themselves. They actually will bubble forth, and this will appear as a fountain. This limnus material, these magicals that have concentrated because of density, but as they escape, they will rise back into the air to become photoreactive with the various life forms in the atmosphere, and eventually those those particles will congeal to the point where they form a liquid. And the process by which they convert from gas to liquid generally has to do with the concentration of the limnus in the atmosphere as well. So I'm not going any further than all of that, other than to say, if you ever wonder what's going on in Nikos that makes no sense, it's cause magicals. So that's my, if you will, MacGuffin for RPGs. And we will carry on to the next part in just a few moments. So, alrighty, so got through 2 sections of my agenda for today, and I don't know how many we're going to get to tonight. I anticipate getting through all of them, but I'm having an issue right now with my eyes burning for some reason. So forgive me for thinking a lot. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the continents of Nikos. Hello and welcome to Nikos Session 0 Chronicles. We're on to Section 3, which is Continental Identities, and today's episode is going to be broken into several pieces. I'm going to be talking about the points in detail for a few moments before I isolate and move on to the next one. But right now, we're speaking of continental identities. Now, if you were to see a map of Nikos, and I don't know if I can actually show you the map here or not. Let me see. Yeah. Alrighty. Okay. Yikes. Ooh, I'm beside myself. That's a wild effect. Wow. Let's not do that. That's too weird. Psychedelic moment there with 2 of us on the screen. Wow. That was funny. Alrighty, so we won't try that for now. I do want to try to put the map back up. Go back to putting up the map. Alright, and we'll see how this works. Alright, so we see the map here, and I can move a little bit off to the side here. So as you notice, that Nikos itself is made up of 3 zones. You have this area here, which is one continent. Then you have this section up here, which is a second continent. And then down here, this here, that section right there is the third continent. So in the order in which I pointed them out, we'll talk about them. The first one, which is this one here that I'm in front of, is Groenland, and Groenland is the largest and most expansive of the 3 continents. It is approximately the same width as North America for scale, and is associated with the other 2 via a land bridge, which is right there. Oops, wrong. Oh. Wow, this is trippy. Wrong direction. There, this land bridge connects the two. And Nordland, which is the northern continent, there, is connected also to Yarlum across its midsection, which is here. The three continents combine, therefore, to create a Pangea-like event, which means you can actually travel from one place on Nykos to another place on Nykos with never having to touch the oceans. And that is fundamentally by design. According to lore, at some point in the past, the this edge here. That's so funny. This used to attach to here on this side. Therefore, it wrapped around. But a long time ago in iteration 6, a group of giants took upon themselves to break the world. So at the World Breaker Cliffs up here, they broke the planet. They literally broke the continent apart, and since then the continent has drifted away from each other to the point where you can't see across the gap any longer. For a good chunk of time, about 1,000 years, you could actually see the two could see each other across the chasm. Since then they've split and drifted further apart. So the continental identities are such that the eastern continent, which is Yarlum, which is the one right here, is the more fast-paced, more eastern in activities, and population tends to speak more rapidly, carry on conversations quicker, and be more nervous acting and wound up. If the other continent, Growland, which is the one that is right here on this side, behind my head, that one is much more slow paced. It's like the American West. It tends to be more laid back, more resolute, doesn't get excited about much. And then the Nordland, which is up here in this corner, they pretty much split the difference between the other two, and also have areas where the lingo is much more, dare I say, Canadian. The feel of the world, if you will, stems from the actual number of human personages from Terra that have made the trek and adventure into the Nykos world, brought with them their own understandings and sensibilities, and therefore cultures have evolved that embrace and hold on to those. Now, this happens not because it's a requirement or that it's a physical demand, but it's simply from a sheer point of I find it clever and funny that the Southerners of Brawlin over here tend to be a lot more laid back and weapons friendly than the ones on the eastern, which is over here, and therefore more restrictive. And that's really what you need to know. When you read the descriptions, therefore, of the continents and the nations within the world of wow, my brain is gone. That is really, really funny. When you read the lore of Nykos, the lore of Nykos does define the country by the continent it is on to make it easier for you to find it. And those lists are available, and I will be putting the link for that into the comments below for you. And if I get a moment, I'll do it also on the Discord, the chat boxes as well. At this point, there's just one viewer. Bless your heart for sticking with us, but unless you comment, I don't know who you are. So thank you for being here either which way. But I'm going to post this in post production rather than in current production because I don't have details. So let me take one quick check here and see if I can figure it out. World Anvil. That's it. I haven't actually been on the site to make some changes out in a while, but on the World Anvil account, which you can get access to by being a member of the Patreon, you can get access to all the lore of Nykos in snippets and bits on the World Anvil account. And if you stop by there on worldanvil.com and you put in worldanvil.com/Nykos, you can find information about the world as well. So it's another way to get to the beginnings of the meat of the lore, so to speak. So this map behind me is the world of Nykos, but it's got some distinctions. So, for example, we talk about the land masses, and they are presented in this map showing the waters as blue, mainly because we as mortals, we as people of Nykos, of Earth, when we look at Nykos as a world, we are so familiar on seeing water as blue that they are placed here as this color. But in the visual spectrum of the people of Nykos, the waters are actually various shades of red and purplish color from the reflection of the sun off the surface. The photosynthesis more directly interacts with the solar body, and in the way that Earth's sun is yellow and provides a green water or a blue water, in the same fashion here, the purplish light from the sun gives the water a reddish tone. And in the shallows where the water is washing up onto the shore, it looks most like, it's still fundamentally a clear liquid, but it, for the most part, looks like a pale rosé wine, if you will, all the way to the deeper parts where it looks almost crimson, and on the horizon where it's the deepest it looks almost black, and hence waters off the shores that are beyond the horizon line are known as the black waters. So I'm going to go on into the next section and we'll talk about water and causeways and such like on Nykos, but I just wanted to make sure we covered the three land masses and how they're associated. So one quick refresher: Jarland is on this side, Growland is on this side, and Nordland is up there, at that northern part. There. Alrighty. Back off. Alright, so again, thank you for your patience in hanging out with us tonight. I'm doing a session 0 Chronicles for NycosRPG and the Nykos world setting in particular. And each one of them I'm segmenting to do separate videos on each so that there can be continued discussion about them without this video itself being terminally long in the YouTube framework. Alrighty, so okay, so now we're going to be talking about oceans, seas, and waterways. This is Jonathan Albin. I am the game master, and we are talking about Nykos, the game world, and we are talking about a session 0 Chronicles. So if you want to get an understanding of the world of Nykos and what it would be to play in that environment, we're now going to be going over the concept of oceans, seas, and waterways. So as I was just starting to say in the last video, when we talk about the oceans and seas and waterways of Nykos, we are not talking about the blue ocean that we are familiar with when we look out at the horizon on the Atlantic or Pacific or Mediterranean or any other of the earthly bodies of water. Instead, we're speaking of, in the case of Nikos, waters that are shaded from pinks and light shades of red all the way to deep blood red to crimson, and in certain places, even with the brilliance of light, a scarlet color. So, with that understood, therefore, the oceans are fundamentally broken down into two portions. First one is known as the Blackwater, and that's any waterway, any body of water, and really there's only one body of water that is outside of the realm of Nikos that gets beyond the horizon line. And therefore, it only applies, if you will, if you sail east or west for the most part. Although argument might be made for south, but no one's ever yet sailed south out of the continent. Having said that, the outer sea, being the Blackwater, does have coastal waters that are navigable for the most part all the way around the continent. And I'll put the map back up for a second to talk about that. Okay, so as you see on the map, let me get out of the way for just a second. If you look at the map in total, you'll notice that the Blackwater goes all the way around all of it. And then the Tween Sea is just this little snippet that goes up the middle. Oops. Right there. That's known as the Tween Sea because it's between Yarland and Growland. So that separation at its narrowest point is about 7 hexes. Yay! You get to see Nikos. Yay! Yes, yes. Actually, you see the sea. You see? But you see the sea as you might have seen it if you saw it as a mortal with mortal eyes. So the idea here is that the oceans on Nikos are not blue, but we make maps so they're understandable by putting the blue there. In the near future, one of the expansions or one of the expressions of Nikos that will be coming will be a recreation of this map, including the waters of the proper color, as well as plant life and such on the continental masses being appropriate. Now, in this case, this map is kind of a hybrid between a geographic map showing where things are as far as the different continents and such, and also showing where the mountain ranges, so it's kind of topographical, but it doesn't show any of the plant life. So the issue, therefore, without having the plant life on it, it looks kind of stark and brown and dark. There are places on the map, if I were to zoom in, which I can't do on this version, but if I were able to, you would see there's actually some trees and such that are placed there, but nothing of any extant version that would be present as it would be visit the planet. As far as rivers, there are as many rivers as you can imagine pouring down from those mountain ranges of Yarland on this side. Down the middle, there's mountain range, and on Growland, that diagonal. I'm getting the number, getting the lines go the right direction. Nope, not that. Yeah, ooh, almost. Yeah. Yay, what fun! So I can't quite get those done. So that is the rivers themselves have never been navigated or mapped, mainly because players have not wanted to pursue that as a campaign theme. I anticipate into the 9th iteration we're going to see a considerable amount of expansion of exploration of the world. Therefore, we should, in the next few months, we're going to be endeavoring to start a 9th iteration live stream campaign. And if you are interested in that, feel free to contact me directly, leaving a message in the chat here or through Discord. If you are a patron of the show, of course, you get access to our Discord, and therefore you get the kind of like the first step into the process of being part of the live stream game. When we do that, it will be vetted, and we will have a audition phase. So I'm I'm willing to start looking at that, but we haven't officially gotten to that point yet. So we're going to do a separate subsection of today's show talking about that in particular. But we're actually formally supposed to be in the oceans, and so now you saw the sea. See? Okay, so turn the map back off for a moment. Alrighty. Before we go into climbs, biospheres, and food chains, I just wanted to thank you for being a part of the show. Thank you for chatting with us. Aniela, I think I'm yep, that's a great name. One of the creatures of Nikos that is one of my favorites was a creature that I created a couple of years ago called the Starbucks. And if you are familiar with American Midwest, two of the most prolific creatures in terms of population, most fecund, are the cottontail rabbits and the antelope, the pronghorn antelope. And a Starbuck on Nikos is basically a cottontail type breed of rabbit that happens to grow horns. These two little spike horns that come off of its head, just above its ears, go backwards over its head between the ears, and they are curved, similar to the base of a pronghorn, but they go all the way to a point like regular goat horns. But the cross section of the horns of a Starbucks are literally a 5-pointed star shape. So I've got a picture. I should go put that up as well, but I don't have access to it right now. But I will be putting up some of the menagerie, if you will, of Nikos in the next few months as well, to get people familiar with the life form difference. Now, Nikos as a entity, as we've already talked about, is a separate world from any other game world and such. So therefore, you're not restricted to the monsters that you might be familiar with a classic roleplay game, although many of them do exist and even have similar type names or similar name type nomenclatures. So we'll go into more of that when we do the zoological session 0 chronicle. But for now, we're not going to go there now. I am going to talk a little bit about climes, biospheres, and food chains. And so as I lead into this, I want to thank you again for joining me for Nikos Session 0 Chronicles. We are working through the list of things that you need to know about Nikos in order to appreciate and understand the play and the conversations that go on about the world. And in particular today, we're going to be, at this point, we're going to be talking about climes, biospheres, and food chains. And one of the things that as a game master I noted is that in roleplay games in general, there's not a lot of thought put into the biology of the creatures and monsters and beasts and aberrations and et cetera, that are in the game. There's not much put in there in terms of what do the creatures eat when they're not attacking party members? What do they do for if they need potable water? How do they gain nutrition? What do they, if they are creatures of finding of a humanoid nature? Where do they get the cloth? What do they use to make their clothing? Do they wear clothing? Etc. Etc. And so, in the creation of the NycosRPG, one of the things that I did long ago was the realization that players would read the monster manual in advance of game sessions on any part of the monsters that they thought they might run into. So as you went from climate to climate and elevation to elevation and geographic type to topographical type to topographical type, the players would be ahead of the curve because they would go and read the books and get up to speed on what kind of creatures they would face. So then they, as players, when they engage with them, could just immediately know how to hunt them or how to fight them or how to overcome them. And as a storyteller, that was always kind of frustrating because part of the fun was introducing something that they weren't familiar with. And so in the early 1970s, when the monster manual, the D&D monster manual was already out, so I guess that was about mid 70s, uh, I took the entire monster manual and I renamed every creature in the book. Just changed their names. Some of them I swapped, some of them I moved around, some of them I made derivatives. So on Nikos, for example, you'll find that there are no classic orcs. They don't exist. But there are Rook. And there are at least two kinds of Rook. There are the Aruk and the Maruk. And there are reasons why they're called these. And we'll go into all of that when we're doing the breakdown of the species and such. But the idea is that the Urgluk are something you've never heard of. The Groll are something you've never heard of. And these creature types are associated with their climes, their environments, what it is where they would live, what kind of places they would occupy, what kind of biospheres they might interact with, where they are on the various food chains. And these understandings of these intricacies are done on a global scale. So fundamentally, I can pick a given hex, given space on that map I showed, and say, I know what's growing there. I know what the apex predators are. I know what the general herbivores are. I know where you can, which plants are edible, which plants are threatening or whatever. And that awareness of the biosphere means that when a party moves or an adventuring group moves from point A to point B to point C, the story then shifts and adapts to where they are in terms of language, the types of dialogue, the types of terminologies that are used, types of occupations might be had by various player and non-player characters they might run into, and so on. And there's also a pretty clear understanding of where the food chain is at any given time. When is there a famine or a loss? When is there a increasing chance of finding something that's monstrous or whatever? And so that shifting of the biospheres happens as the players move through the story, therefore making it feel more alive. And one of the dynamics of the NycosRPG is by keeping the worlds moving and dynamic like this, it allows for the gameplay to feel more engaging, and part of what the players are doing is determining what kind of a climate, what kind of an environment, what kind of biosphere do they want to. All right. We're going to go on here in a minute to atmospheric patterns and anomalies, but I just wanted to clear that part. So, having said all of that, I want to thank you again for staying with me and watching this video. We are working our way through the Nikos Session 0 Chronicles, and this is the first episode. There may be 2 or 3, because there's a lot to go over to get a whole picture of what Nikos is. And without a full understanding of what Nikos is, your experience as a player might be limited. Now, you'll notice that I'm not going into specific details on these things to the point where you're going to lose your sense of wonder. I'm just simply giving an overview so that you have a common vocabulary and a common concept of what the world is like. And the reason for doing that is I want players to feel like the world is a place they want to engage with, they want to be a part of. So you definitely want to stick around, because the next part we're going to talk about are atmospheric patterns and anomalies. Alrighty, welcome to Nikos Session 0. We are talking at this point about atmospheric patterns and anomalies. And the first thing I need to say is that weather is as capricious as it is on Earth. The idea that if you don't like the weather the way it is right now, stick around a few hours, it'll change. The environment of Nikos is under even greater strains than that of Terra, of Earth, because it's being constantly bombarded and permeated by the very nature of magical energies that are emanating from Nimbus, its primary star. These waves of Nikos' magicals, therefore they come from Nimbus, are stronger or weaker depending on all kinds of characteristic issues. How much cloud cover do you have? How much magical activity has there been in the recent region? How many creatures with mystical defenses are operating within a certain area? How big is the population? All of these things influence what the atmospheric pattern and what possible anomalies there might be. Generally speaking, the atmospheric patterns do operate on a similar pattern to Terran atmospheric patterns in that they tend to move in opposition to solar activity. So as the sun optically moves from east to west, it's actually the wind moving from west to the east because you're moving as the earth moves. So same fashion here. So the trade winds run the northern side eastward and on the southern side westward, and therefore travel is circuitous for the most part for the winds and the waters and the waves. So that adaptation, of course, shifts over time as the world itself recesses around its solar body and such. So that is the primary weather atmospheric patterns. Now, beyond the patterns, there are some major anomalies, and that is from time to time, that was intentional, from time to time, there are storms. And these storms that appear are created by a static point in the timeline resisting the change of the fluctuating time of Nikos. Since we are now talking about being in the 9th iteration, that means that time clock of the world has literally restarted 8 times before. This is the 9th time. And this 9th iteration does have some anomalous points that at some point in the future may or may not create time storms. And these points are those points that are static and cannot be affected by passage of time, and therefore they resist that shift. And as they resist that shift, atmospheric effects pressure up and build to the point where they rip a hole in the space-time. And that rip forms in the form of an eddy, which looks like, for all intents and purposes, like a cyclone or a storm. And characters can be drawn into that storm and therefore shift from one iteration to another iteration, or even into the space between, stay within the storm itself. Now, not all of these storms are visible. Not all of these storms stay permanent. Some of them are static to the location, but not to the time. Others are stuck in the time, but not necessarily to the location. So all of this leads to confusing anomalies, which are experienced by the players in terms of what they choose to interact with. So having said that, the overall atmosphere is breathable. Higher elevations tend to have more difficulty with breathing, but have an increased amount of magical activity. So therefore it's traditional for those who would be magi that would want to create mystical effects are going to do so in towers. They're going to be on the tops of mountains. They'll be sometimes in desolate wildernesses because of their known connection with an anomaly or whatever. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but the idea is that the atmosphere of the world, it's conducive to magics across the board. The higher in elevation tends to be the more powerful the magic. More on that a little bit later. So that's all I have to say, if you will, about atmospheric patterns and anomalies at this point. When we get to the specifics of them later, we will go into them. So now we're going to move on to the next portion, and this is probably the largest section, and I'm not going to spend all of it today. I'm going to just go over the basics, and we'll do more on the rest, and then we get back to this at a later time. So we're going to talk about lore, history, and the iterations. So the Nikos story, chronologically, in Terran terms, dates all the way back to the early 1970s. mid I should say mid 1970s when I learned to play the game. I sat for the first time to play at a table that was directed by David Arneson, one of the guys that designed the game. And in playing at his table, I learned basic mechanics and immediately got a love for the idea of being the storyteller, game master, and I never stopped. So for 48 plus years, I've been on a weekly basis a game master and storyteller. Now, not a lot of people can lay that kind of a claim, but the point is that in the 1970s, shortly after I started playing, I started to create the Nikos story. And the Nikos story, if you played every week, would take 6.5 years, about 6 years to 7 years, generally around 6.5 years, to play completely through. And in this last time, it took just a little bit longer. We started in 2016, and we are right now in the death throes. We have one group still holding on to the end, if you iteration, but generally, time has already started for the new clock in the 9th iteration. And because of that, the groups that are being played in NycosRPG are the first ones that will be playing within the NycosRPG without the other role-play game elements, solely using the Nikos. With that said, the lore, however, does repeat every so many years. And so, therefore, in this iteration, by the nature of how the previous iteration ended, there is, pardon me, access to the lore of the Ark. You can actually find places at libraries and in ruins and in archives. You can gather information on the lore going all the way back. Some of it's in the form of Easter eggs. Some of it is in the form of repeating cycles of adventures, which are on, if you will, the chronological wheel. Some of them are new interpretations of older activities based on what the players have done. And then finally, there is also new stuff as the life forms on Nikos have adapted and evolved over time. Lore, therefore, is one aspect of history, which is the written chronology of the Ark. But there's also the written histories. And the histories are a little bit more precise. And the histories tend to be told from the standpoint of the culture from which they come. And that cultural line tends to fall along the species lines. Now, we don't cater to the concept of there being more than one. Well, we just flat out say there are no other species or humans than the mortal species or human species. That's it. We are all the same species. But if you are going to play someone of elvish blood, you're going to play somebody of the Grundam, dwarvish blood. The other species all break down by where they came from, and what they have as far as history is going to be dependent upon what they perceive. For this reason, there are dozens of origin stories on how the world came to be and how the beings came to be. But all of them acknowledge the iterational pathway, that there is a grand arc path, whatever it is, that takes you all the way through from the beginning to the end of the story, which comes out to about 7 years in real time. In terms of character life, that roughly means 3 different characters have made it to Paragon level. But that was before the 9th. Quite frankly, I don't know what the current iteration will do. And fascinating to find out. But just realize that you can look to the future by looking to the past on Nikos in terms of lore. But the histories are going to be unique to each culture, and therefore you're going to have a little bit more dynamic fun digging through the interpretations thereof. And the iteration will still continue, and see whether or not there will be another iteration beyond this one. Alrighty. The final section I'm going to talk about is a section that has not yet been invented, if you will, and that is the concept of the maps of the constellations of these purple skies. Since the world has only had stars for roughly 300 years, I don't yet have anybody who has chosen to pursue that aspect. And what I mean by that is not only not have any players, I don't have any NPCs that show any interest in it either, because the sky is so, if you will, janked up with the passage of the two suns, it might be impossible to come up with a series of constellations. But we'll have to see whether that's the case or not. But that's where we are with that. And we are now at the 1 hour mark. We have actually accomplished the show by getting through all the pieces I wanted to. I would have appreciated to have this as a communication back and forth, but unfortunately we didn't have anybody. And I hope if you're still on and you want to talk, feel free to send me a text message or a message in chat. I'll be glad to talk with you. Otherwise, I'm going to be closing out this video so I can start the post processing to start putting these into separate videos for YouTube. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for your observation of this extended program that got to the 1 hour mark, and to invite you to become a member of the Nykos podcast, which is available. NycosRPG podcast is available. It's the Game Masters Sandbox series, and there are 30 plus episodes there, and that's just the beginning. So I hope to see you soon. Thank you very much for watching this episode, and we'll see you next time on Nykos. See you guys later.